What the? Hello and welcome to the Back Pass, a podcast for sports nerds by sports nerds. This week we discuss NFL, National Football League. Yep, the Back Pass panel will be visiting America right here on the show. We preview the 2022 season while trying to understand how the sport works. Hello and welcome to the Back Pass. I'm your host Ali Mulwala, and with me today I have Shivank, Gurpreet, and our NFL expert in the box, Kevin. Hello, gents.
Hey, how's it going?
Hello.
Howdy.
Kevin, just for this episode, are we calling you Madden?
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, you can call me Madden for this episode. That works.
Done. Nice and easy. So, Madden, let's crack straight into it. The first and last question for tonight. Who wins the Super Bowl?
The halftime show.
Yeah, I mean, like the halftime show last year was spectacular. That was all the '90s R&B artists. Yeah, it's great fun to listen to that.
Dr. Dre made a comeback.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But in all seriousness, after watching Buffalo absolutely dismantle last year's Super Bowl champions, last season's Super Bowl champions, I'd say Buffalo.
They seem to be everyone's favorite pick. They seem to have got a strong roster, and I absolutely don't know what I'm talking about. So everyone listening should take that definitely to heart. I'm very much. Yeah. I know the rules of the sport. I just don't know the players and the teams behind it. So it's a lot of guesstimating and a lot of relying on Kevin for answers to questions.
So maybe a cheat sheet or a shortcut for anybody who's looking to, get some NFL knowledge or at least be knowledgeable. You pick the team with the best quarterback, and you're probably going to have the best team. And that's normally how it works in the NFL.
Brady?
So Brady, yeah. So
I was going to say you should also caveat that with doing a little bit of research about who the best quarterback is.
You saying like 40-year-old Tom Brady is not the best quarterback in the league?
I believe he's turning 45 this year.
Oh, geez, okay. So 40-year-old Tom Brady was the best quarterback in the league. Jeez.
Yeah, a while ago. Yeah, he's 45. Bought in 1977. He looks better than me.
Jesus.
Well, it's this is based purely on an hour of desperate Google searching in preparation for this podcast because I know probably less than Ali about NFL, but in said Google searches, Kevin, Josh Allen was ranked the number one quarterback, followed by Patrick Mahomes, and then Aaron Rodgers. So that was the Bills, Chiefs, and Packers. Would you agree with that ordering? And Brady was ranked fourth.
Yeah, I'd probably say Bills and Chiefs. The Chiefs have been in the AFC title game for, I want to say, 3 years. They've been to the Super Bowl twice and they've won it once. So definitely the Chiefs. Bills, as I mentioned before, Josh Allen looks like the best quarterback in the league, especially after what he did on Friday. Rodgers has been the MVP. He's made it to a couple of title games, but I think their team is not as good. So I probably wouldn't put them in the top 4, maybe top 5. And I'd insert maybe, I was going to say the Rams, but none of the NFC teams look as good as the AFC teams. So it could be pretty one-sided once it gets to the Super Bowl this year, but who knows? It's always competitive.
Kevin, for our listeners and myself, let's not pretend I'm any smart when it comes to the NFL. I've heard two things over here. The National Conference and the American Conference. Could you explain to us what these are?
So,
Because
I think the way that I described this just before the pod was, you would have, if you cast your minds back to the 90s, and you're a rugby league fan, you would have been around with the Super League and the the rugby league conference leagues. They had the same sort of thing in the 60s in the US, and they eventually amalgamated. Now, one of the leagues was called the American League, and the other one was called the National Football League. They merged, became National Football League, and hence you have the American Conference and the National Conference. That's how they came about.
right. So you'd think that naturally every team in a conference plays against every team in the same conference, and then you have a Super Bowl. The conference winner A versus conference winner B. Like basketball, for example, you have
It
the
kind of makes
NBA.
sense, right? Like,
Yeah,
Mm.
that's how
Far
you.
too logical.
Yeah,
Far,
far
far
too
too
logical,
logical,
right?
Siobhan.
we're
I mean, look,
talking facts here.
literally, I needed 3 screens here. I needed 3 monitors to figure out how this playoff thing works, right? Because I was the same as you. I was like, okay, 32 teams, 16 teams per conference, 16 game season, maybe it's going to be fairly logical, but no. Kevin, do you want to shed a little bit of light for our listeners around how this fixture scheduling is done? Because 3 monitors worth of diagrams and I still couldn't figure it out.
Okay. I'm going to try and explain this in a way that makes a little bit of sense to the general public. So, the NFL is based on rivalries. And so the best way to generate rivalries is have the same teams play each other, and also have them fight out what would be their ticket to get to the postseason, right? So each of the conferences has 4 divisions. The 4 divisions have 4 teams in each division. Makes sense so far. They play each other twice. One
So far,
home,
so
one
good.
away. Yeah,
So far, so good.
So that takes, if you do your math, 8 games
Mhm.
to be able to do that, right? Because you have 4 in each. So that cuts out about half of the games that are available. Now, the problem with that is that then you can't play every other team once. So now you have to have another way to generate the schedule. And what they've basically done is gone with an approach where randomly they choose between conferences. So they'll go, this year NFC East will play AFC West. Okay, and they play each other once. And then the rest of the games are pretty much like, I'd like to say I can't see a pattern to it. Um, so the last 4 games are just basically well, actually, I think they also they've shifted to another division competition as well. So you play another division of, so you would play NFC East or NFC North in that scenario.
And I guess, Kevin, it's this bit that made me feel a little bit uneasy about the postseason.
Hmm.
Because effectively you've got this format where you've got the 6 games with the other teams in your division, and then you've essentially got 10 games which are somewhat random. So effectively what happens as a result of this is when you go into your postseason, you've got 6 teams from each conference, the 4 division winners, and then you've got 2 wildcard spots going to the teams with the best win-loss record. And I couldn't help but think that the randomness of the fixture scheduling would very much dictate who those wildcard slots go to. Would you agree?
Very much so. Yes, very, very much so. Um, until very recently, there was one team. The top 2 teams had a bye week, and that's huge in the NFL because it's such an
Sure,
attrition
sure,
based sport.
sure.
Having the week off, I mean, it's like any other contact sport.
It's
It's,
like the NRL postseason, right?
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
So having that week off makes a huge difference. Um, so the best example is still the Patriots. The Patriots have played probably in the worst division during their dynasty for a long time. Like Miami, Buffalo, Jets. Jets have only been, reasonably good for maybe while Rex Ryan was there, and that was a 2 or 3 year period. So when you have an easy division, it makes it easy for you to make the playoffs and then have that bye week. When you have that bye week, your chances of getting to the Super Bowl are much higher.
Mm.
So definitely, they're also, depending on, there's so many complex factors involved here. So when to have a good team, you need to have, it's not just about talent, because this is the upper echelon of talent that comes through, and there's a pre-built training ground, which is college football, that
Yep.
pushes high quality talent into the league on a regular basis, and that's why the average career span of an NFL player is 3 years. Yeah, so
Wow.
it's not about talent. It's mostly has to do with your organization and how well run your organization is, from your ownership down to your GM to your head coach. If you don't have a good owner and who's willing to invest, then you're not going to be able to pay the players properly. And if you don't have a good GM who can manage the cap to know when to play the players properly, then you won't have a quality team. And so it just rolls on from there. So you can have years where entire divisions have been absolute rubbish, and which means that once it gets to the wild card, they just become fodder for the
Mm,
rest of the
mm, mm.
playoff.
So, Mr. Madden, riddle me this: why are the two LA teams not in the same group?
Ooh.
Same goes for the two New York teams, not in the same division.
When it is supposed to be all about the derbies and the rivalries,
Ooh.
right?
Oh, Ali.
So that's a very good question. You don't see this a lot in other sports, but in the NFL, it's reasonably, I'm not going to say common, but it does happen on a semi-regular basis. If there is some sort of disagreement with the city or locale, the NFL owner is willing to pick up the entire franchise and move it to another location where it's a bit more amenable. So if you can imagine, when some of these divisions were set up, certain teams lived or played in certain other locations, which I'm a Colts fan. So Colts originated in Baltimore. They, in the dead of the night, shipped to Indianapolis. The Baltimore fans were not happy. And even though we haven't,
Understandable.
like my generation have no, bone to pick with this. They have a team now that they've supported.
Baltimore have their own, yeah.
Yeah. So, but still, they bring it up on a regular basis, and that's basically some of the key factors involved, like the timing.
So
and
you're
when certain things
saying that is equivalent to Manchester United and the owners going, Manchester's not working out for our team. We're going to uplift Manchester United and we're just going to play in Barcelona because clearly the weather's better there. The beaches are better in Barcelona.
And there's too many
So-
levers you can pull.
And it's more extra levers. We gain extra
No.
levers by being in Barcelona. And then we can sign FDJ.
No, Ali, I think Man City have literally done this. They've created another team from Manchester based in Dubai.
There are
But
secret
basic-
passageways between Manchester and Dubai that allow them to function in this way.
But basically, it's a way of saying if a rich billionaire's had enough because the city council and them don't get along, they can throw their toys out of a pram and walk away.
Yeah. Yeah. If Old Trafford was, in disrepute, then potentially
Which it is.
they have a similar. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's history, mate. It's you can't just tear down Old Trafford.
So basically, history's got no place in the NFL.
Mm.
Pretty much, yeah. 5 years. Well, yeah, I'm going to say five. Yeah, 5 years ago, the NFL didn't have any teams in LA.
Yeah.
Closest team was San Diego or San Francisco, one of the two. I'm not too sure about geographical distances, but now they've got a
San
team in.
Diego's closer.
Yeah, okay. Well, there you go.
Shivang's all about supporting teams with no history.
We make history. We make history every single day rather than reliving something that happened 20 years ago. See, that's why the NFL's appealing to me. I'm like, oh, history doesn't matter here.
That's why I'm a 49ers fan. It's all about 20 years ago. It's all about the history.
You might be disappointed to know I'm on this 49ers crew as well.
Oh,
So,
gee, what's going on? Like, I can't figure out how this whole postseason thing works. And then Shivank and I actually end up supporting the same team for once.
well, depends
You know
if
what's
count the
funny?
revenues.
Mr. Madden and I had like a long chat a couple of weeks ago about picking a team to support, and we narrowed it down, and turned out 49ers was one of those teams that was on that list. We might all just be backing 49ers for the season. Like,
I
we
love
might just
it.
be like,
I love it.
let's ride the 49ers wave all the way to the Super Bowl. Well, 49ers should make the playoffs, right? They've got a strong team.
Yeah,
They've got a good-looking
they should.
team, and
Yeah, so they should. The question marks. Well, I mean, they made the AFC title game last year, NFC title game last year. So they're a very very good, well-run franchise. They've got a good GM, good ownership, and also a pretty fantastic head coach. Without getting into the weeds about offensive coaching strategies and too much about the history, this guy's the son of a coach, and he's been to two Super Bowls, both of which he's lost the exact same way. But it's worthwhile noting that he's gotten to two.
Kevin, what was rather concerning in this list of NFL quarterback rankings was Trey Lance, the 49ers quarterback, was ranked dead in the middle, 16th position. Is that cause for concern? Is
Good
that
thing
fair?
is, it's a little bit high, I reckon. I'd say,
Oof.
Here come
but
the burns.
there's a good reason for it. I'm going to qualify it. Okay, so the reason why it's high is, I believe, like, past behavior is a good representation of future behavior. So his past behavior is okay. So,
Wow.
Ali really didn't want me to talk about this.
I reckon we should have edited that out. Just leave that in there.
So that's an alarm before I get
Yeah.
eliminated.
Your burn was too sick. The fire alarm went off.
Anyway, getting back to the point. So Trey Lance hasn't really played a lot of NFL snaps. So by that logic, he hasn't really done anything to put him in that 16th position. I'd probably keep him as maybe unranked or maybe bottom 16 or somewhere like that, and leave it at that. But he's got a lot of talent. He's a good, tall, big, mobile with a strong arm athlete. For all intents and purposes, I believe he's got a good head on his shoulders, and so he should perform reasonably well. The other thing I'd say is that 16th is not, maybe 10 years ago would have been pretty average. Nowadays, it's not. The quality of quarterback talent has gone up in the last 3 or 4 years.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. And actually on this, Kevin, for our listeners, would you just mind and boiling it right down to basics, but just talking about why the quarterback is so important?
Yeah. So you can break this up into two halves. One is no other player in the team. So there's 53 people.
Wow.
that can
50,
touch the ball.
53.
53.
Yeah.
Wow.
And
I
no
thought
other
I thought Chelsea had a big roster, but 53.
Hey,
Goodness me.
our lone army doesn't even scratch the surface of how big an NFL
No.
roster can be.
No.
yeah. We even have there's a practice squad as well. So not including the 53, there's an additional group of players that can be called up at any given point in time, depending on injuries. So it's not a small, it's a mini army basically, and that's why there's three teams. You've got your offense, defense, and special teams that split up the roster. Out of all of those players, I'd say maybe more than 50% of the ball touches, so the person who would handle the ball, is done by the quarterback. All of the offensive snaps would be touched by the quarterback. The quarterback would also distribute the ball as well. So if you have a running play, the quarterback's the one who takes it from the center and then gives it to the running back in most cases. If you have a passing play, he's the one who would throw it to the wide receivers or the tight end or the running backs out of the backfield.
I guess so. In rugby terms, and I was trying to compare it to. So in Union we have the halfback and the fly half. The quarterback isn't actually either of those. He's both, right? He is the
Yeah.
halfback and the fly half in one.
Yeah, he's pretty much, yeah, exactly. That's exactly what he is. And on top of that, he's also the modern day quarterback, especially when we're talking about that upper echelon of players. So if we say maybe 14 to about, yeah, 14 to 1, you would have this role called the field general. It was pretty much developed over time, but I think the key man who's responsible for it was a bloke called Peyton Manning. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Sure.
Pretty
Mhm.
special player. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
And like in no other sport, he is a coach on the field who knows the playbook well enough that the position of where the players come out and stand is given to him by the offensive coordinator, the play caller, but then he dictates everything else. And that field general position it manages the clock because from a timing standpoint, how long you hold the ball, knowing when to change the tempo to tire a defender down, tire defenders out, and knowing when to hold the ball so that you can uh, keep your defensive team fresh. Things like that are so important to how the game is actually played and won. The quarterback is in charge of most of that in the field general role.
Mhm. Hey, so we've spoken about the fact that there's 53 players in a team. We've spoken about the quarterback. We've spoken about the wide receiver, the blindside receivers, or everyone. Um, we actually haven't discussed how do you win a game or what the rules of the game are.
Score more points than the other team.
Yeah, but what's the process of scoring points? Because okay, yes, you get four attempts to cross 10 yards, and then you rinse and repeat until you get to the final side. That's the very basic that I understand, Kevin. But are there more rules that our audience should be familiar with?
To watch the game just as a spectator, I think that's probably the first step. Step two is then understanding the different types of plays that are involved with getting to getting further down the pitch. So similar to rugby and league, it is a game where you take the ball to the other end of the field and get the ball into a designated space at the end called the end zone, or try line. Similar sort of concepts there. In NFL, you break the plane, so you take the ball past the plane, this invisible line, or two-dimensional
Just
wall
over the line in any way.
over the
Yeah.
line. Yeah, you just have to break it. You don't actually have to go technically over it. Um, and as long as the ball is across it, then you score what is 6 points. Then you have your extra point, which is the same as like a field goal or a goal kick. 1 point there. But you can also take a 2-point shot, or sorry, a 3-point shot, the equivalent to a penalty goal in rugby league. If you feel like you have a kicker that can kick it through the posts, um, and you have a available down. So typically what happens is if you have a choice once you get to 4th down, so after your 3 attempts, whether to punt the ball, whether to kick a field goal, or to try and go for an additional attempt at breaking that,
The 10 yards.
the 10-yard gain. So that line, once you break it, it resets, and therefore you go forward. But if you do go for the fourth down play, and trying to break that line for 10 yards, but you don't make it, you hand the ball over immediately, which is often, from a tactical standpoint, not a good idea. You have to be really confident that you can actually do it.
It's kind of like league when it works like that, right? Like it's like you have to kick on the last tackle, otherwise,
yes, exactly the same. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're stuck with the ball at the halfway, and the other team gets to have a shot.
Yeah.
Kevin, just building from what Siobhan was saying. So the objective of the game is to cross 10 yards and eventually to score a touchdown. One of the things that I found really fascinating was we all, I mean, massive football and league and union fans, and these sports are a lot about the transition. Effectively, the transition is where attack turns into defense, right? Or defense turns into attack, and you've got this counter attack going on. But in NFL, you've literally got 11 other players coming on to defend, right? And for most of the last 20 minutes, we've spoken about how important the quarterback is, but the quarterback is important to the offensive part of the game, right? So when that defensive team comes on, who is calling the shots on the field, right? So you've your Tom Brady or your Trey Lance have gone off, and the defensive guys have come on. Who is calling the shots at that point to stop the other team from scoring?
I love how Gurpreet just put Tom Brady, Trey Lance in the same bracket as Tom Brady.
Well, I mean, those are the only 2 names I know, Ali.
So. Good question. Very good question. With the defense, it's a little bit more up to whoever the smartest player is on the field that has the greatest amount of vision. And so that can be a schematic thing as well. So I'd say about a large proportion of teams nowadays would have their linebacker being that person, the play caller, because they're both not too far away that they can't see what's happening at the line of scrimmage, which is where the big boys basically ram heads. And yet they're not so close that they can't see anything, on the peripheries. Classically, I think safeties. So these are the guys that would be your equivalent to a fullback from a defensive position standpoint.
Sure.
They would be also playmaking, but I think most of the time nowadays it's a linebacker. Yeah. So you do need a really good linebacker as well, or a series of linebackers, but they split that up. So there's 2 linebackers on the field, sometimes 3. Sometimes they may only have 1, and they'll have 3 safeties or 3 defensive backs or something like that, depending on what scheme that they have. But yeah, it's just a little bit insight into the complexities of the game.
Kevin, can you come close to the mic?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, thanks. Now we can carry on.
He needed to be closer to the line of scrimmage.
Yeah. Kevin, there's one more thing that we touched about early on in the show, where you said, the general lifespan of an NFL player is 3 years, and part of the reason you attributed to it was the structure of college football that you have going on in the US. The NCAA thing and everything. It's very different to what you'd associate with the rugby league over here or the rugby union setup over here.
Mm.
And it's also completely different to how y- football works in Europe, soccer works in Europe. Can we
Yep.
just so basically, is it the same kind of competition that happens at college level, or is there any difference?
The game is almost the same. There's some slight variations in rules. So things like you to complete a pass and stay in bounds, you have to do you need only 1 foot. Whereas in the professional game, as I'm going to call it, you need both feet. Um, Also, in the professional game, if you get, yeah, for instance, if you fall to the ground, like you just slip over, the game doesn't stop. You can get back up and start running again. In the college game, you can't. So that's things that they've done to preserve to reduce the number of contacts. There's some other changes in the rules that I won't get into. They're more complicated to explain and would bore most of our listeners to no end. um, the last one obviously is the width of the field. It's slightly bigger, and the shape of the ball is different as well.
Oh,
Okay,
Yeah.
that's
interesting.
odd.
Interesting.
So
Is
the
there?
shape of the yeah, there's a good reason for that, and that's because there's younger athletes being involved. So the hand
Ah,
size is what dictates
Ah,
that. Yeah.
ah.
In terms of a structure, there is no structure in college football. There's no, basically, as I like to describe it, a whole bunch of lads get into a room at the end of a college season and just go, who are the teams that look the best? And we're going to pick four of them, and they'll play in the college football playoffs. So terms like style points get called in, like, get used a lot when describing how certain teams have made it. It's a little bit more fairer now, because a lot more teams get
Define fairer.
televised.
Define fair.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an interesting point. Thank you for raising it, Shivak, because there's not a lot of fair things about the college game.
And I
But
was about
I
to come on to one of them. There was a nice
okay,
segue planned.
okay, perfect. So just before I hand that over to you, Shivak, um, there was a time period in which not every college football game got televised, which meant that if it didn't get televised, nobody saw it. They only saw the box score. So if you can imagine a whole bunch of lads sitting in a room talking about style points for a particular game that they've never watched.
Fair enough.
Not sure how fair that is.
Speaking of fairness and things being televised, another consequence of things being televised is all of a sudden your college football players are a lot more recognizable, and the
Mhm.
names, image, and likeness are a lot more prominent now than they were in the past. And this become a huge thing in college football in the US, where there are colleges that are making millions of dollars off
Mm.
these athletes or young prospect athletes, and the coaches are being paid in the millions.
Yeah.
But the my simple understanding is the players aren't getting a fair share of the bargain, and it's erupted into this entire mess called the NIL stuff. Can you talk about that a bit for our general listener?
Yeah, so let's take a step back. So it is an amateur sport for all intents and purposes for the longest period of time. Um, we've spoken about amateur sports before and how they get set up. Often in those
Yeah.
scenarios, the league doesn't have a
Hmm.
lot of money. But the one thing about college football is that it is really the only gateway, the true gateway to get to the professional game. Whereas when we talk about amateur sports, if there is a professional version, there are a multitude of methods of getting there. So if you're not a student athlete that plays at a college that's done well and gets recognized, you won't get drafted and then you won't get signed. And if you don't get signed and drafted, in the best case scenario, you're probably not going to make it onto an NFL roster. The second part to that is that the higher you get drafted, the better chance that you have to stay on the team to get your first big paycheck. So
Mm.
in the NFL, rookies are on a rookie contract. They get, like, the higher your drafting is, the more money you get paid. Um, if you don't make it to your second contract, you're on your rookie deal. It's still a lot of money, but it's, far short from the tens of millions of dollars that you can make. Um, and then the socioeconomic situation has changed quite a lot. So a lot of these guys are African American athletes, minority groups who come from impoverished neighborhoods, don't have a lot of money. They play the college game to get to the professional league to make a bit of money that way, because that's probably the only thing that they're good at. They don't get paid in college. They injure themselves and they'll never make it to the professional league. And that's really what it comes down to. You have these multi-billion dollar amateur game, which most of the money goes to the colleges and the coaches, and the colleges invest all of their money into facilities.
Yeah.
There is a flip side to this, that a lot of American athletes outside of football and basketball and baseball will make comment about, and that's the money that's not going into paying these players goes into funding the other sports. And it's an argument
Mhm.
that is kind of justified, because if you think about it, the US, even though it's got 200 plus million people,
Yeah.
still has, from a Olympic standpoint, talented athletes coming out of there. And there is a legitimate conversation and argument to be had when saying that these sports wouldn't be funded as well if football did pay their athletes.
Right. Okay. So there's a lot of gray area over here, but then it gets weirder as well as you dig into this deeper. Like I get the entire angle about college football subsidizing all the other sports and actually having programs that allow athletes to flourish in other ways. But surely your coach is getting paid $5 million a year is a bit absurd for a sport that is still classified as amateur.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And especially that as well at that level, and the amount of the facilities. Like, if it was just like, oh, that's a nice stadium. Like, pretty much every single one of the college football stadiums is better than Eden Park. It's larger. It's better than Eden Park.
Yeah.
Every single one of those colleges,
As
right?
disheartening as that comparison is, the
And
answer is
that's
yes.
the national stadium of a country, of a World Cup dominating, a sport dominating team, and it's not as good as a college stadium.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean the most stark example of this was I think this is going back 3 or 4 years when United played Real Madrid at
Madrid.
Michigan Stadium.
Yeah.
That had a sellout crowd of 109,000. My aunt actually went to that game, and I asked her like, "Oh, which NFL team plays at Michigan Stadium?" And she was like, "No NFL
Michigan
team plays there.
University.
It's a it's a college stadium
Yeah,
with like
exactly.
109,000." Yeah,
Yep.
I mean that is exactly what you're saying, Ali. Right? That
Yep.
is 3 times Eden Park, right?
Exactly. It's like, what are we gonna do with this extra 10 million we have over the next 5 years? Just build a bigger stadium. Just build it better.
Yeah, 100%, 100%. Yeah, at
Can't can't turn a
different
profit.
different scales,
Yeah.
different scales.
I was gonna say, one thing that I would say about, like, the college football game that's very different from that any other amateur sport is the investment from the local population in the college team's success is
Hmm.
huge.
Mm,
It's a cultural thing. Like, I mean, what university you studied doesn't really make much of a difference for most of us who live in Australia and New Zealand. But
Hmm.
for Americans, it's a huge part of
It's a
who
huge
they
part.
are.
Massive.
Yeah.
And that also results in some crazy stuff happening. Like I've heard stories about, you know, boulevards where trees have been around for 100 years that have been, the entrances to these, schools or these universities being poisoned because they lost against another team, or they beat another team too badly, and this guy just wanted to get revenge. So there's stuff like that, that sort of, I mean, it's almost football hooliganism at the amateur level. You hear about this kind of stuff at Man U and EPL, and we talk about toxic fans and things like that. But yeah, it's the
Yeah.
same sort of thing that happens at the
You
college
could have
level.
just said Liverpool fans, right?
I was trying very hard not to. Trying very hard.
I mean, you use the word toxic, right? So it's pretty much a synonym.
But to your point, Kevin, even last night, I think with Notre Dame's game, what
Yeah.
happened at the end is very much what you've described with how the streets have been after that result.
Mm. Yeah.
So yeah. So it's
And
very much
for all our listeners who didn't watch the Notre Dame game, do you want to describe what happened? Me included.
yeah. You go, Kevin. I just saw it on the Athletic.
So Notre Dame, I'm going to pronounce it properly.
Damn.
Is one of the better footballing and more historically known college football teams. They're currently sitting in a 0-2, and they lost against, I want to say, the Stampeding Herd. That would be Marshall. So they lost against Marshall, which is not a very good team. Well, they're decent enough, but anyway. So to put it frankly, you have hooliganism plus death threats plus potential coach who just got hired 6 months ago, well, even less than that, 3 or 4 months ago, getting racial abuse and stuff like that. So it's not an ideal situation for for them at the moment. Yeah.
My only link to Notre Dame, and the only thing I can actually think of, is the movie Rudy, and which is a
Yeah.
really, really, really old reference. And Notre Dame sound like they could probably use a Rudy or two in the team.
Yeah. It's actually based on a true story, by the way. Like it's
Yeah.
not completely a script. It's somewhat. I think it's based on a couple of players through their history, but it sort of speaks to their culture. Yeah.
Wrap up.
Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, that's all we have time for tonight. Thank you very much for Madden and his taking the time out tonight from his busy schedule to join us and explain everything NFL and answer a whole myriad of questions for us. As usual, you can join us and our crew and get sports nerdy with us on our usual channels, which is on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at the Back Pass Podcast. Lovely hearing from you guys. Thank you very much, gents. Good night.